There are 5 things that all avoidants feel when you suddenly disappear. And no, they aren't the obvious ones like anger or validation. You've probably heard of those before. These are the things that most people completely miss. The hidden emotions and subconscious reactions that avoidants would never admit, not even to themselves. Your sudden absence doesn't just leave a void. It actually triggers something deeper. Something that can shift the entire dynamic between you and the avoidant in your life. We'll start with the big one, the freedom hangover. Now, I've talked about this extensively, but for some reason, it always shocks people. Every insecure attachment style has what I call a core wound. Think of this like a crack in the foundation of a home. Over time, as pressure builds, whether from shifting ground or external forces, the crack widens and becomes more unstable. For insecure attachment styles, certain situations act like stressors that irritate and deepen the crack, making it harder to ignore and more likely to affect everything built on top of it. So, for the anxious attachment style, the crack revolves around a fear of abandonment. Meaning anytime they enter a situation where they feel they'll be abandoned, their highly anxious traits come out. With the dismissive avoidant style, their crack revolves around a fear of losing their independence. So anytime they feel smothered in a relationship or sense a perceived threat of commitment, it triggers their avoidant traits. And of course, fearful avoidants have the core wounds of both an anxious and a dismissive avoidant, making them highly fragile. All right. This should be nothing new to anyone who watches my videos. I've literally talked about this concept hundreds of times. But this video is a bit different. We're talking about a situation where you suddenly disappear, not the other way around. What happens then? Well, if you follow the crack in the foundation logic, at first they may feel an exhilaration of regained freedom, like a little kid who's just been let out of school and allowed to play on the jungle gym for recess. There's this initial rush, a sense of relief that they no longer have to deal with the emotional weight or perceived demands of the relationship. It's quiet, it's calm, and for a brief moment it feels like everything is exactly as it should be. This is the avoidant in their comfort zone, enjoying the space that they have and have newly created for themselves. But just like that kid enjoying recess, it doesn't last forever. You can actually see this play out on my avoidant death wheel graphic. See right here with stage 6, this is the avoidant recess. They're partying, they're having a great time by themselves. But like I said, it doesn't last forever. Eventually, with stages 7 and 8, the toll comes. Sort of like a hangover. They've gorged themselves with freedom to the point that the very silence they craved starts to feel heavy and hollow. The space that once felt like a sanctuary begins to echo with an unsettling emptiness, making them question whether freedom always comes at a price. It's not that they suddenly long for connection, at least not consciously, but the absence of any external distraction forces them to sit with feelings that they've spent so long avoiding. And this is where the cracks in the foundation truly begin to show. And I guess this is sort of like where the rest of this video comes in. The rest of this video is going to really explore what it's like for an avoidant who is sitting at this stage of the process, sitting and experiencing their feelings, the very feelings they don't want to experience. All right, so let's move on to thought number 2. Regret combined with digging their heels in. I found this on the breakup subreddit from a self-confessed avoidant when asked if avoidants ever realized their loss. I used to be an avoidant. I've done a lot of work on myself to be better at communicating and recognizing my trauma responses, but oh man, I was a roller coaster when I was younger. For me, I always realized my first instinct was to still pull away. And I often go through brutal cycles once the emotions calm down. Oh God, what have I done? It's too embarrassing to admit I messed up. And eventually back to, no, I made the right choice. Let's withdraw. When the emotions became too much again, sometimes I would verbalize and act on whatever stage I was in. Sometimes I wouldn't. All right, so what does this seesaw of emotions tell us or teach us about avoidance? Well, I like to think of it like a pendulum swinging back and forth. At first, the pendulum swings hard in one direction, regret. This is the "oh God, what have I done" phase, where the avoidant starts to feel the weight of their decision. It's a moment of vulnerability, like a crack in the emotional armor, when they recognize, even just for a moment, the value of what they've lost. But just as quickly, the pendulum swings back. Pride and fear kick in, and they dig their heels in with thoughts like, "it's too embarrassing to admit I messed up." This phase is all about self-protection, building up a narrative to shield themselves from the discomfort of accountability or the risk of reaching out only to face rejection. Then comes the final swing. "No, I've made the right choice. Let's withdraw." At this point, the pendulum has reached the other extreme, and they convince themselves that they're better off alone. This realization quiets the regret for now and lets them regain a sense of control, even if it means suppressing their emotions. The thing about a pendulum, though, is it always keeps moving unless something stops its motion. For avoidance, this swinging back and forth between regret and retreat, that's their default. Without conscious effort to face the emotions head on, they're stuck in this repetitive cycle, avoiding growth and deeper connection in favor of temporary relief. And sometimes they resent you for it, which brings me to my next point. Thought 3, a subconscious need to punish you. Anger is an interesting emotion, isn't it? It often disguises itself as power, but underneath it's rooted in vulnerability. Think about it. Phrases like "you're the worst" or "you're stupid" are designed to elevate the person saying it and put down the person receiving it. So "you're the worst" really means "I'm the best," and "you're stupid" translates to "I'm smart." At its core, it's a defense mechanism. It's a way of reclaiming control when you feel out of balance or like you've lost that control. Now here's the thing. For avoidance, this plays out in a far more passive-aggressive way. They might not lash out directly. Instead, they'll use silence, but in that silence, there is kind of an undercurrent of anger. By not reaching out, they're not just avoiding confrontation. They're hoping that you'll feel the subtle sting of their disappearance. Think of it like a kind of punishment for you interrupting the status quo. How dare you ignore me? I'm the one that's supposed to ignore you. All right, time to embarrass myself. It's 2008. I'm 19 years old and I've just graduated from high school. My buddy and I have a trip planned to go to Fiesta, Texas. It's this gigantic roller coaster park somewhere in the middle of Texas near San Antonio. I stay up late on the phone talking to my girlfriend the night before I'm due to wake up early for this road trip. Like most nights lately, my girlfriend and I are fighting. I grow frustrated and simply hang up on her without any explanation and go to bed. The next thing I know, my alarm is going off. My buddy picks me up in front of my house and we're off. I make a conscious choice to turn my phone off and not text my girlfriend. I'm still angry at her for the fight and just want to avoid the stress. Eventually, as the day wears on, we get closer to our destination, and I decide to turn my phone back on. I text her to let her know we're almost to Fiesta, Texas. She says something snarky back, and then I grow angry and text back, "I'm through. I can't get away from this conversation fast enough." Now, I meant that I was done with this conversation, this fight, whatever, but she took it to mean I'm through with the relationship. I never correct her. I told myself it was better this way. I'd gotten my freedom back and I wasn't going to waste it, but underneath that newfound freedom, I was resentful. I felt hurt by the constant fighting and made a promise to myself. I would not text her first during the breakup. She needed to suffer for all the pain she'd put me through. Now here's the kicker. I didn't realize it at the time, but this mindset, the "I'm not going to chase you, but I want you to notice that I'm not chasing you, and I want you to feel bad about it," well, that was my subconscious way of punishing her. It wasn't about moving on or finding some internal peace. It was about maintaining emotional control while also avoiding any direct confrontation. Now, looking back now, it was so clear. I was a dismissive avoidant. I wanted to avoid the confrontation. It was probably the wrong way to handle the situation. I think I convinced myself that I was protecting myself, But all I was really doing is just trying to avoid the emotions, burying it deep inside myself. But in doing so, I not only caused her a lot of, quite frankly, unnecessary pain, but I caused myself a lot of unnecessary pain as well. You see, here's the reality. This subconscious need to punish is less about you and more about a dismissive avoidance internal struggle. It's their way of reclaiming a sense of power in the face of emotions they don't fully understand or want to confront. Now, recognizing this hidden dynamic really helps shed a light on why avoidants sometimes seem indifferent when in reality their silence speaks volumes about what they're feeling beneath the surface. Let's move on to that next feeling. Number 4, a hypothetical confrontation fantasy. We're on YouTube, so let's just continue to embarrass myself. I had just gone through this breakup. I had sworn to myself that I would not reach out to my ex first. I'd wait until she reached out to me. She did. I was rude. And then we didn't talk again for a long period of time. But this was my first real relationship, the high school sweetheart kind. We used to do this thing where I would show up to school at 5 a.m. right before it opened so I could be there to see my girlfriend and get just a little bit more time with her. And it became this routine for us. I would wake up early around 5 a.m., walk an hour to school, arrive around 6 a.m., at which point her mom would drop her off around 6 a.m., and then we would have a whole hour together before school would start at 7 a.m. Of course, an entire summer had gone by since we had broken up. School was about to start. I had graduated. She was about to start her senior year. But I couldn't help myself and kept daydreaming about her, about this routine, about what it would be like to bump into her again, what I would say, how she would come running back and just beg for me. It got to the point one day where I decided I was going to manufacture a situation where I would meet with her like old times. I was going to show up at school. I knew her mom was going to drop her off. I knew what time she'd be dropped off. I knew where she would be dropped off. So the day comes and I start walking toward the school, but halfway there, it hits me. What am I doing? This is crazy. And I get cold feet, turn around, and go home. Looking back, I can see exactly what was happening. I wasn't over the breakup and I wasn't as fine as I was telling myself. This whole plan was my way of trying to prove something, not to her, but to myself. I wanted to prove that I was still in control. I don't know why my mind went here, but for some reason I thought if I could see her, it would validate every decision I had made to that point. And this is what avoidants often do. They might not reach out, but they daydream about bumping into you by accident. An imagined scenario where they're in control, where they come out on top. But these fantasies are rarely just about pride. They're tangled up with a lot of different conflicting emotions. Regret, longing, feelings that they just don't want to admit to themselves. In my case, that moment on the sidewalk where I decided to turn around and go home was me basically avoiding the discomfort of reality. Because deep down, I knew the encounter I had imagined in my head wouldn't go the way I had imagined at all in reality. And this leads us to a more philosophical question. Number 5, falling out of love versus simple deactivation. So I know I'm technically breaking the rules here because this technically isn't a feeling they suddenly feel when you disappear, but I feel like it's an important thing to talk about. I think 99% of the problems that I read about in the comments of these YouTube videos, the less toxic comments of these YouTube videos, boil down to this one simple philosophical debate. Does an avoidant who grows distant from you really fall out of love? Did they suddenly lose interest? Were they ever truly in love at all? Where you were always kept at an arm's length? Or is this just their natural deactivation strategy, a way to avoid accountability and conflict? Here's the thing. Love for an avoidant is rarely straightforward. It doesn't fit neatly into the molds most people expect. Avoidants may feel love deeply, but it often gets buried under layers of self-protection. To them, love can feel dangerous, like a threat to their independence or a risk of being seen too clearly. Vulnerabilities they've spent their whole lives guarding against. So when they pull away, it's not always because they stopped loving you. Sometimes it's because they loved you too much, and that love felt suffocating. Other times it's because their defenses kicked in before they ever allowed themselves to love fully. And then there are moments when they simply don't know how to handle the intensity of what they feel, so they run. Not from you, but from the discomfort within themselves. Does that mean they didn't care? Not necessarily. Does that mean they're incapable of love? Well, again, not necessarily. What it means is that avoidants often operate from a place of fear. And that fear dictates their actions more than their feelings ever could. Here's the profound truth. Love is not measured by how easily someone stays. It's measured by their willingness to stay when it gets hard. Avoidants often fail this test. Not because they lack the capacity to love, it's because they lack the tools to put it into action. So, was it love? Well, in many cases, yes, it was. But it's love filtered through the lens of self-preservation. They're held back by walls that they themselves don't even know how to break down. And that's the great tragedy here. Because by the time they often realize what the problem is, it's too late. If you take anything away from this, remember this one sentence. Their distance isn't always a reflection of your worth. Often it's a reflection of their wounds. I actually talk about this in my video on the hidden reason avoidants won't fight for you. Most people think they won't fight for a relationship because they care more about their independence or they're afraid of being vulnerable. But my research has found something a little bit more nuanced than that. So watch that video to find out what that hidden reason is.